Poor girl walks into a hospital asking for a cure for missing someone. The young billionaire discovers why and breaks down in tears. The hospital corridor smelled of disinfectant and sadness. James walked slowly, his footsteps echoing on the white floor that reflected the cold ceiling lights. He was there for a routine visit from the foundation, something he had done for years, almost on autopilot. He would go in, greet the staff, sign a few checks, and leave. But today would be different. A small, thin voice cut through the silence. "Doctor, do you have any medicine for missing someone?" James stopped. He turned and saw a little girl sitting on a blue plastic chair in the hallway. Messy blonde hair, enormous blue eyes, red from crying so much. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old. She swung her little legs, which didn't reach the floor, holding something against her chest. "I'm sorry, what was that?" he asked, approaching slowly. "My mommy went away," Grace said, stopping her legs from swinging. "The nurse said she went to heaven, but I miss her so much. Don't you have a medicine for that?" James's eyes instantly filled with tears. The child's innocence, the way she believed there was a remedy to cure the world's deepest pain, broke something inside him. He swallowed back the lump in his throat, trying to keep his composure. "Oh, sweetie," he murmured, his voice cracking. Children have that unique ability to ask impossible questions with the most natural air in the world. "Look," he knelt to be at her level, discreetly wiping his eyes. "I don't have that medicine, but I can try to help you not feel so alone. What's your name?" "Grace," she answered, wiping her nose on the back of her hand. "Grace. That's a beautiful name. I'm James." The girl studied him with those big, sad eyes. There was something about her innocence that moved him even more. She held a crumpled photo against her chest, as if it were her most precious treasure. "Is that photo important to you?" James asked gently. Grace nodded several times. "It's my mommy. It's the only one I have." "Can I see it?" Grace hesitated. She looked at the photo, then at him, then back at the photo. Her tiny fingers clutched the paper carefully. Finally, she held out the photo with trembling hands. "Is this your mum?" James asked, taking the picture. "Yes," Grace murmured. "It's the only one I have of her." James looked at the photo and his world fell apart. "It can't be!" The words came out as a shocked whisper. The photo slipped from his trembling hands and fell to the floor. Grace quickly bent down to pick it up. "Sorry," she mumbled, checking to see if the photo had torn any more. "I know it's a bit ripped." But James was barely listening. Sarah. It was Sarah. The girl he had loved as a teenager, whom he had lost due to pride and foolishness. The only person who had ever managed to completely break his heart. Wavy blonde hair, bright, clear eyes, that smile he knew by heart. Even with the faded photo, even after so many years, he would recognize Sarah anywhere. What was your mother's name?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Sarah Mitchell," Grace replied, gently running her little finger over the photo. "She was the most beautiful in the world." James closed his eyes. His legs felt like they couldn't support him. Sarah Mitchell. It was really her, and this child was her daughter, the daughter of the woman he had loved most in his life. "Grace," he said, trying to control his voice. "Do you have anyone else? Grandparents, aunts, uncles?" "No," Grace shook her head, her little eyes filling with tears again. "I don't have anyone else in the world. Mommy always said it was just the two of us. Just the two of us." The words echoed in James's head like a punch. Sarah had raised this girl alone, without anyone's help. "And where will you live now?" he asked, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. "I don't know," Grace shrugged, trying to seem strong. "The nurse said they'll find a place for me." James couldn't accept that. Not Sarah's daughter. Not this little child who had already lost everything. Sarah was the great love of his life, and even though things had ended badly between them, he would never let her daughter be left helpless. "Grace, look at me," he said, kneeling in front of her. "What if you came to live with me?" Grace blinked several times, confused. "Live with you?" "Yes, I have a big house. You would have your own room. You could play in the yard." "But you don't even know me," she said, tilting her little head to the side. "Sometimes you just know things without needing to know much," James said, and it was true. He felt he needed to take care of her, for Sarah, for the memory of what they had. Grace was quiet for a while, clutching the photo to her chest. "Do you promise you won't send me away?" she asked in a very quiet voice. "I promise. What if I cry a lot? You can cry as much as you want. And what if I miss my mommy? We'll miss her together." Grace studied him with those big, serious eyes. Then she nodded slowly. "Okay, but if you change your mind—" "I won't change my mind," James interrupted. "Never." "Did you know my mommy?" she asked suddenly. The question caught James off guard. "I did. A long time ago. She was very special to me." "What do you mean, special?" "She was kind and smart, and she had the most beautiful smile I've ever seen." Grace smiled for the first time since she'd arrived, a tiny but genuine smile. "It's true. Mommy had the most beautiful smile," she agreed. An hour later, James was signing paper after paper. Grace waited, sitting in a chair, clinging to her mother's photo. Every now and then she would look at him, as if she still couldn't believe this was real. James's car was silent. Grace sat in the back seat, looking out the window with her eyes still swollen from crying so much. He tried to start a conversation a few times, but she seemed lost in thought. "Grace," he called gently, "are you okay?" "I think so," she answered quietly. "It's just... everything changed so fast." "I know, but you don't have to be afraid of me, okay?" Grace nodded, turning back to look out the window. When they arrived at the mansion, Grace stopped at the entrance. "Wow," she whispered, looking up. "It's really big." The house was indeed impressive, large, modern, with a perfectly manicured lawn. But James suddenly saw it all through her eyes. Cold, empty, soulless. "Come, I'll show you your room," he said. Grace followed him in silence through the immense corridors. Her little footsteps echoed on the marble. James opened the door to a spacious room with a view of the garden. "What do you think?" Grace entered slowly, as if she were afraid to touch anything. She looked around, the huge bed, the big television, the light wood furniture. "It's very pretty," she murmured, "and very big." "Too big?" Grace shrugged. "I used to sleep in Mommy's bed. It was small, but it was warm. And she always stroked my hair before I fell asleep." James felt another pang in his chest. Of course she felt lost here. "Do you want to eat something?" he asked. "I can order pizza, burgers, whatever you want." "I'm not hungry," Grace murmured, sitting on the edge of the enormous bed. "Are you sure?" She just shook her head. She sat there, holding her mother's photo. "All right," James said. "If you change your mind, just call me. I'll be nearby, okay?" Grace nodded without looking at him. James left the room, but left the door ajar. He went down to the living room, but couldn't concentrate on anything. He kept thinking about Sarah, about how she had this daughter and faced everything alone. After an hour, he heard a small noise. Quiet sobs coming from upstairs. He went up slowly. Grace was curled up on the bed, crying into the pillow. Sarah's photo had fallen on the floor beside the bed. James stood at the door, unsure whether to go in or not. His heart ached, seeing that small child suffering so much. "Grace," he called softly. She stopped crying but didn't answer. "Can I come in?" A long silence. Then a barely audible yes. James entered and picked up the photo from the floor, placing it on the nightstand. Then he sat on the edge of the bed, keeping his distance. "You miss your mum?" "A lot," Grace sobbed, turning to him. "She always sang a quiet song for me to sleep, and she would tell made-up stories about princesses and dragons." James smiled sadly. Sarah had always been creative. He still remembered her writing poems in her notebook during classes. "You know what I think?" he said gently. "I think your mom would want you to try to be happy, even while you miss her." Grace studied him with her red little eyes. "How do you know?" "Because all mothers want their children to be happy. It's what they want most in the world." Grace looked thoughtful, wiping her nose on the back of her hand. "Mommy always said I was the most important thing in her life. Then she would want you to try to smile every once in a while." Grace nodded slowly. James. Yes. I know all of this is very new for you too, he said gently. But I want you to know that I'm going to take care of you, okay? Because of your mum. She was very important to me. Grace studied him seriously. Can you stay here until I fall asleep? She asked. I don't like being alone in the dark. Of course, as long as you need. James settled into the armchair in the corner. Grace curled up under the blanket, picking up her mother's photo and clutching it to her chest. James? Yes. Thank you for not leaving me alone. I will never leave you alone, Grace. You can be sure of that. He stayed there until he was sure she was asleep. Looking at that small child lost in a huge bed, James felt something he hadn't felt in years, a desperate urge to protect someone. She was Sarah's daughter, the daughter of the woman he had loved the most. That was enough. He would do anything for Grace, simply because she was Sarah's daughter. James went down to the living room and poured himself a whiskey. He sat on the leather sofa and thought, Sarah had vanished from his life more than 6 years ago, simply disappeared after that terrible fight they had. He had tried to look for her at the time, but his pride got the better of him. He thought she would come back, that she would apologize first, but Sarah never came back, and now she was dead. James closed his eyes, feeling the weight of guilt. If he had gone after her back then, if he had swallowed his pride, maybe Sarah wouldn't have faced everything alone. Maybe he could have helped with Grace. Maybe things would be different. He went up the stairs slowly and stopped at the door of Grace's room. The girl was sleeping, hugging the photo, her blonde hair spread across the pillow. James stood there for a few minutes, just watching. She was Sarah's daughter, living proof that the love of his life had existed, had been happy for a while. As he headed to his own room, James made a silent promise. Grace would never be alone again. He would give her all the love and care that Sarah would have given. He would be the father she needed, even if he wasn't her biological father. It was his way of honoring the memory of the woman he loved most in his life. And maybe, just maybe, he could forgive himself for letting Sarah go. Maybe Grace would bring back some of the light that went out when Sarah left his life. James woke up early, after a restless night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sarah's face in the crumpled photo Grace held. He got up slowly and went to the girl's bedroom door. It was still closed. Complete silence. He went down to the kitchen and stood there, not knowing what to do. He had never taken care of a child. He had no idea what Grace liked to eat, what time she woke up, if she had a specific routine. He remembered her words about her mother's pancakes. Sarah made the best pancakes in the world, Grace had said. Maybe that was a good start to try and connect. James opened the cupboards, looking for ingredients: flour, eggs, milk, sugar. He wasn't sure about the right measurements, but he improvised. As he mixed the batter, he thought of Sarah. She was always good in the kitchen, even when they were teenagers. He remembered her making cookies for him after his soccer games. The smell of pancakes filled the kitchen. James hoped Grace would come down, drawn by the aroma, but there was no noise from upstairs. After waiting for half an hour, he decided to go up. He knocked lightly on the door. Grace, are you awake? Silence. Then a quiet little voice. I am. Can I come in? You can. James opened the door slowly. Grace was sitting on the bed, still in her pajamas, holding her mother's photo. Her blonde hair was messy, and she looked like she had cried again during the night. How did you sleep? He asked gently. So, Grace replied, without looking at him. I had a nightmare. Do you want to talk about the nightmare? Grace shook her head. I made pancakes, James said, trying to change the subject, like your mom used to make. Want to try some? Grace looked up for the first time. You know how to make pancakes. I tried to, James smiled. I don't know if they're as good as your mom's, but... Mommy used to put in a few drops of vanilla, Grace murmured, and sometimes some berries on top. She said pretty food makes the day happier. I have strawberries and blueberries. Do you want me to put some on? Grace hesitated for a long moment. Okay. James waited for her to get changed, and they went down to the kitchen together. Grace stood at the door, observing the set table, the pancakes stacked on a plate, the strawberries and blueberries chopped up in separate bowls. "Sit here," James said, pulling out a chair. Grace sat down slowly, still holding the photo. She placed it next to her plate, as if Sarah were there having breakfast with her. James served 2 pancakes on her plate and let her choose the fruits. Grace placed a few strawberries and blueberries on top, arranging them in a pattern. She looked at the food, then at him. "Mommy always ate with me," she said quietly. She didn't like me eating alone. She said food was meant to be shared. "I'll eat too," James said, serving himself and sitting in the chair next to her. "So you won't eat alone." Grace picked up her fork and cut a tiny piece. She chewed slowly, thoughtfully. "Is it good?" James asked. "It's tasty," Grace replied, and it was true. But Mommy's were a little sweeter, and she always made them in the shape of a heart. "Next time I'll add more sugar and make them heart-shaped." Grace nodded and continued eating. Small bites, no rush. James ate too, watching her discreetly. It was amazing how much she looked like Sarah as a child. The same clear eyes, the same small nose, the same way of tilting her head when she was concentrating. "Grace," he said gently, "do you like to draw?" "I love it," she replied, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "Mommy always bought me colored pencils. She said I drew very well for my age." "I have colored pencils here. Do you want to draw a little after breakfast?" Grace thought for a moment. "Can I draw, Mommy?" "Of course, you can draw whatever you want. And you won't watch the whole time. Only if you let me. I can read a book nearby." Grace seemed satisfied with the answer. After breakfast, James brought a box of colored pencils he had bought along with the toys. He placed blank sheets of paper on the living room table and settled on the sofa with a book, keeping his distance but staying close. Grace sat at the table and looked at the pencils for a while, as if deciding where to start. "Should I draw right here?" she asked. "Wherever you feel most comfortable." Grace picked up a yellow pencil and began to draw. First, a large circle. Then long lines coming out of the circle. "This is Mommy's hair," she explained, concentrating. "It was very blonde, just like mine. She always said we looked like sisters." James watched over the top of his book, trying to be discreet. Grace picked up the blue pencil to make the eyes pink for the mouth. Slowly, a face began to take shape on the paper. "Mommy was the prettiest on the street," Grace said, without stopping her drawing. "Everyone said so, and she smelled nice, like garden flowers." James felt a pang in his chest. Sarah always wore a floral perfume, jasmine, if he wasn't mistaken, a simple scent but one that stayed in your memory. "What else do you remember about your mum?" he asked softly. Grace stopped drawing and looked at him. She sang in the shower, really loud, like in a real performance, and she danced around the house when she was cleaning, and she always made a funny face when she ate something sour. James smiled. Sarah really did that. He remembered her eating a lemon and making a face that made him laugh for hours. "And she liked movies that made you cry," Grace continued, returning to her drawing. "She said crying was good for the heart, that it was like a cleaning from the inside." That was Sarah, too, always sensitive, always emotional. James remembered seeing her cry at the movies, watching romantic films, and then smiling and saying she felt better. "Now, where did your mum work?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "She cleaned big houses like yours," Grace said, picking up a green pencil to draw what looked like a dress. "She left really early and came home tired, but she always played with me before bed, even when she was very tired." James felt another pang in his chest. Sarah cleaning houses. Working hard to support her daughter alone, while he lived in that mansion full of luxury, without a care in the world. Mommy said that honest work was a reason to be proud, Grace continued, that it didn't matter what kind of work you do, as long as you do it with love. James swallowed hard. Sarah always had this simple wisdom, this way of seeing the world that made him feel small sometimes. "Mommy dreamed of having a house with a garden," Grace said, now drawing some shapes below her mother's figure. "She said that one day we would plant flowers together." "What are you drawing there?" James asked. "They're flowers," Grace explained. "Mommy loved flowers. She said they were like nature's smiles for us." James's eyes filled with tears. He hid it, pretending to be reading. "What kind of flowers did she like best?" "Daisies," Grace answered without hesitation. She said they were simple, but beautiful, like her, always thinking she was simple, but everyone knew she was special. James knew that humble side of Sarah well. She never thought she was pretty enough, smart enough, good enough, always putting herself down, always surprised when someone complimented her. Grace finished the flowers and picked up another piece of paper. "Now I'm going to draw our old house," she announced. This time she drew a small rectangle with a door and 2 windows, very simple but neat. Beside it, 2 small figures, one big and one small, holding hands. "This is me and Mommy," she explained, pointing to the figures. "We always stood at the door talking to our neighbor, Mrs. Rose. She was very nice and always gave me candy." "You had nice neighbors." "Mrs. Rose was the best," Grace said, focused on her drawing. "She looked after me when Mommy had to work far away. And there was Mr. John, who fixed broken things. He fixed my doll when her arm came off." James listened to every word, trying to imagine the simple life Sarah had built for Grace. Neighbors who became family. A small community where everyone knew and helped each other. "Do you miss Mrs. Rose?" he asked. "A lot," Grace nodded. "She made a sweet bread that was so yummy, and she always asked how I was doing in school, and she gave me medicine when I had a cold." "Did you like school?" So, Grace shrugged. "It was hard sometimes. The other kids had a mom and a dad. I only had Mommy. Some boys said I didn't have a dad. Did that bother you?" Grace stopped drawing and looked thoughtful. "A little. I always asked Mommy where my dad was. She would get sad and say he couldn't be with us. That sometimes life is complicated." James felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Sarah, sad, talking about Grace's father. About him, even though he didn't know Grace existed. "What else did she say about your dad?" "That he was a good person, but that sometimes good people make choices that hurt," Grace replied, returning to her drawing. "And that when I grew up, maybe I would understand these grown-up things better." Sarah's words echoed in James's head, choices that hurt. That was exactly what he had done. Bad choices out of pride, out of stubbornness, out of fear of admitting he was wrong. Grace continued to draw in silence for a few minutes. Now she was making what looked like a park, with swings and trees. "This is the playground where Mommy took me on Sundays," she explained. It had swings, a slide, a seesaw, and some ducks in a little pond. "Did you always go there?" "Every Sunday that it wasn't raining," Grace smiled for the first time that morning. "Mommy said Sunday was a day to be a kid, even for grown-ups. She would play on everything with me." James could picture the scene. Sarah pushing Grace on the swing, going down the slide with her, both of them laughing loudly without caring who was watching. "Mommy would go on the swing too," Grace continued, excited by the memory. "She would swing and sing really loud. Everyone would stare, but she didn't care one bit." "Your mum wasn't embarrassed to play?" "Not at all." Grace shook her head. "Now she always said we have to enjoy the good moments, because life is full of bad moments too." Sarah's wisdom, always so wise for someone so young, always trying to find joy in the simple things. Grace started another drawing. This time it was a bed with 2 small figures lying side by side. "This is bedtime," she explained. "Mommy always told made-up stories." "About princesses who were brave and didn't need anyone to be happy." James smiled. Sarah had always been independent, always wanted to show Grace that a woman could be strong on her own. What kind of stories did she make up? "There was a princess who built a castle all by herself with her own hands," Grace said, now all excited. "And another one who tamed a dragon and became best friends with him. And there was one who could fly without wings, just because she believed she could. Your mum was very creative." "Very," Grace nodded. She made up new stories every night, never repeated the same one, and all the princesses were brave and smart. Grace stopped drawing for a moment and looked at James. "Do you know how to tell stories?" "I'm not very good at it," James admitted, "but I can try if you want." "Mommy said everyone knows how to tell stories. You just need to use your imagination and your heart." Grace went back to drawing, now making what looked like a small kitchen with a table and 2 chairs. "This is when we had dinner," she explained. Mommy always asked how my day was, and I told her everything, even the boring stuff. She listened to everything carefully. She was a good listener. The best, Grace said fondly. She never said my things were silly. Even when I talked about little things, like a butterfly I saw or a drawing I made in school. James could imagine Sarah listening to Grace with full attention, giving importance to every little detail of her daughter's life. Mommy said the little things were the most important, Grace continued. So like a goodnight hug, or a kiss on a boo-boo, or making a funny face to make me laugh when I was sad. Grace took a new sheet and started another drawing. This time she drew two large hearts, side by side, connected by a line. This is Mommy's heart, and this is mine, she explained carefully. Mommy said that even when she wasn't here anymore, our hearts would stay connected forever. James had to swallow back a sob. Sarah's wisdom, teaching Grace about the love that continues even after death. She's right, he said, his voice a bit hoarse. True love never ends. Grace looked at him with those big, serious eyes. You loved my mommy a lot, didn't you? The question caught James off guard. He was silent for a moment, thinking of the best way to answer. Yes, I did, he finally said. A lot. She was very special. So you miss her too? I do. I miss her a lot. Grace nodded, as if that explained everything. That's why you want to take care of me. Because you loved her, and she loved me. That's one of the reasons, James said gently, but also because you're special, just like she was. Grace smiled a little and went back to her drawing. Now she was making little dots around the hearts. What are those dots? They're the good memories, Grace explained. Mommy said that good memories stick to your heart forever, like little stars in a dark sky. James watched Grace draw, each dot made with love and care. With every stroke, he felt as if Sarah were there in the room with them, as if she were whispering in his ear about her daughter, about love, about the simple but affectionate life they had built together. For the first time since he found Grace in the hospital, James felt that maybe he could take care of her properly. It wouldn't be easy, but with patience, affection, and lots of pancakes, they could build something beautiful together. After all, they both loved the same person, and that was a very good start. James woke up that morning with an idea. Grace had spent the last few days inside, drawing and talking little. She was eating better, sleeping without crying as much, but she still had that distant look of someone carrying a burden too heavy for her age. He knocked on her bedroom door. Grace, how about we go out today? Go out? Her voice came, muffled. Yeah, go for a walk, get some fresh air. What do you think? Grace opened the door, still in her pajamas, her blonde hair messy. Where to? I was thinking of a park, James said gently. A place with trees, a lake, kids playing, like the one you drew that you used to go to with your mum. Grace looked thoughtful for a moment. Will there be other people? There will. But we don't have to talk to anyone if you don't want to. Okay, she said quietly. But can I bring Mommy's picture? Of course. You can bring whatever you want. An hour later, they were in the car on the way to the park. Grace sat in the back seat, holding the photo against her chest, looking out the window with curiosity. It was the first time she had left the mansion since she arrived. What park is this? She asked. It's a big park in the city centre, James explained. It has a lake with ducks, a playground, a carousel, ice cream. Like the one I went to with Mommy. Similar, but bigger. Grace nodded and went back to looking out the window. The streets flew by, full of movement, people walking, cars, life happening. When they arrived at the park, Grace stopped at the entrance and looked around. It was really big. Huge trees, green lawns, stone paths, scattered benches. In the distance, you could hear the voices of children playing. It's pretty, she murmured. Come on, let's walk, James said, holding out his hand. Grace hesitated for a second, then took his hand. They walked slowly through the park, in no hurry. Grace observed everything in silence, absorbing every detail. They passed a small lake where ducks swam peacefully. Grace stopped to watch. Our Mommy said ducks were happy because they didn't worry about tomorrow, she said quietly. Your mother was wise. She was, Grace agreed. She knew a lot of things about animals and plants. They continued walking. Further ahead, they reached an area where several children were playing. There were swings, slides, seesaws. Grace stopped and watched from a distance. A girl her age was coming down the slide, screaming with joy. A boy swung high while his mother pushed. Children ran, laughed, played tag. "Want to get closer?" James asked. Grace shook her head. "I just want to watch." They sat on a nearby bench. Grace watched the children intently, as if studying how they managed to be so happy. "They don't know," she said suddenly. "Don't know what?" "That sometimes moms go away." James felt a pang in his chest. Grace was seeing the innocence of the other children, remembering when she too had that innocence. "Most kids don't know," he said gently. "You've always been smarter than most." Grace continued to watch. A small child fell and started to cry. Immediately, the mother ran to help, cleaned the scrape, gave it a kiss, and the child went back to playing as if nothing had happened. "Mommy always did that for me," Grace murmured. She'd kiss the boo-boo and say the kiss had healing powers. And did it? It did, Grace smiled sadly. It always stopped hurting. They sat there for a while, just watching. Grace seemed lost in thought, probably remembering her Sundays in the park with Sarah. Suddenly, a golden retriever appeared, chasing a ball. The owner, a young man, ran after it, trying to catch up. The dog ran close to their bench, tongue out, tail wagging. Grace smiled for the first time that day. "What a beautiful dog," she said. "He is beautiful." "Do you like dogs?" "I love them. Mommy always said that one day we would have a dog, when we had a house with a yard." The dog came running back with the ball in its mouth, passing by them again. This time it stopped, looked at Grace, wagged its tail, and dropped the ball at her feet. Grace looked at James, asking for permission. "You can pick it up," he said. Grace picked up the ball, a bit hesitant. The dog sat in front of her, waiting. She threw the ball gently. The dog ran after it, caught it, and brought it back. "He wants to play with me," Grace said, surprised. "Looks like it." The dog's owner approached. "Sorry," he said. "Max can be a little too friendly sometimes." "No problem," James replied. She likes dogs. Grace threw the ball a few more times. With each throw, she smiled a little more. The dog was patient, gentle, as if it knew she needed affection. "What's his name?" Grace asked the owner. "Max," the man replied. "He's 3. He loves kids." "He's beautiful," Grace said, petting the dog's head. Max rested his head on her hand, asking for more pets. Grace giggled. After a few minutes, the owner said goodbye and left with Max. Grace waved at the dog until he disappeared. "That was nice," she said. "It was, want to see more things?" Grace nodded. They got up and continued walking. They passed ice cream vendors, street performers, people having picnics on the grass. Grace watched everything with growing curiosity. When they got near the carousel, Grace stopped and watched the children going up and down on the colorful little horses. The cheerful music played, the horses spun slowly, the children smiled and waved to their parents. "Mommy always said carousels were magical," Grace said, fascinated. "That when you rode on one, your problems were left behind for a few minutes." "Want to try?" James asked. Grace hesitated. "Can I?" "Of course. Let's go." They approached the carousel. Grace chose a white horse with a golden mane. James stood beside it, holding the photo she had asked him to keep. When the carousel started to turn, Grace held on tight to the reins. At first, she was serious, focused, but as the movement became more familiar, she began to relax. On the second lap, James saw a small smile appear on her face. On the third lap, she waved to him. On the fourth lap, when the horse went up and down in a quicker sequence, Grace let out a laugh. It was a small laugh, but a real one, the first since she lost her mother. James felt his eyes fill with tears. It was a beautiful sound, full of life. For a few seconds, Grace was just a 5-year-old girl playing on a carousel. When the ride stopped, Grace got off with her eyes shining. "That was fun," she said, still smiling. "Mommy was right. It really is magical. Want to go again, can I?" As many times as you want. Grace rode the carousel 2 more times. With each lap, she became more comfortable, more of a child. The last time, she waved to everyone watching, as if it were a performance. When they finally got off the carousel for the last time, Grace was different, lighter, more present. "James," she said, taking her mother's photo back. "Yes. I think Mommy would be happy to see me playing." "I'm sure she would be. She always said I had to be a child while I was a child. And she was right." Grace looked around the park, observing the families, the children, the life happening. "Can I come back here again?" "Whenever you want," James promised. "We can come every Sunday if you'd like." "Like me and Mommy used to." "Just like you used to." Grace smiled and held his hand. "Can we see the ducks again before we go?" "Of course." They walked back to the lake. This time, Grace wasn't just observing. She was participating, living in the moment. They sat on the edge of the lake and watched the ducks swim. Grace threw some breadcrumbs that James had bought from a vendor. "James," she said suddenly. "Yes. Thank you for bringing me here." "You're welcome. Did you like it?" "I liked it a lot," Grace replied. "It's been a long time since I really laughed." "You have a beautiful laugh." "Just like your mom's." Grace smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. "I think today was a good day." "It was a very good day." They stayed there for a few more minutes, in silence, watching the ducks and feeling the gentle late afternoon breeze. When they returned home, Grace was more talkative, more present. During dinner, she talked about Max the dog, the carousel, the ducks. At bedtime, she asked James to stay until she fell asleep, as always, but this time, before closing her eyes, she said, "James, I think Mommy would have liked you." "Why do you think so?" "Because you made me laugh today. And Mommy always said that people who make us laugh are special." James smiled and stroked her hair. "Rest now, Grace. We can go to the park again tomorrow if you want." "I want to," she murmured, already half asleep. "I really want to." As Grace slept, James thought about her smile on the carousel, her spontaneous laughter, the way she waved to people. For the first time since he found her in the hospital, he felt that Grace might be able to be happy again. It wouldn't be the same as before, but it would be something new, something good. It was a beginning, and every beginning brought hope. Back at the mansion, Grace was different. The trip to the park had awakened something in her that James hadn't seen since the first day at the hospital. She talked more, smiled occasionally, and seemed less haunted by the ghosts of her loss. During dinner, Grace shared more details about the day, imitating the sound Max the dog made when he barked, describing the colors of the carousel horses. James listened attentively, happy to see her opening up. "James gone," she said, playing with the last bits of food on her plate. "Yes." "Do you think we can go to the park again tomorrow?" "If you want to, yes." "I do, but not on the carousel again. I want to see if Max is there." James smiled. "All right, we can look for Max." Grace nodded, satisfied. After dinner, they went up to her room. Grace changed her clothes and brushed her teeth, following the routine they had established over the last few days. James waited in the corner armchair, as he always did. When Grace got into bed, she took her mother's photo and placed it on the nightstand. Then she turned to James. "To James?" "Yes." "Can you read me a story?" The question caught James off guard. It was the first time Grace had asked for something like this. Until then, she had just wanted him to stay there until she fell asleep, in silence. "Read a story," he repeated. "Yeah. Mommy always read to me before I fell asleep. Or she told made-up stories. But tonight I want a real story from a book." James looked around the room. There were a few children's books he had bought, but they had never used them. "What kind of story do you want?" "Any kind. I just want to hear your voice reading," Grace said, snuggling into her pillow. "Mummy's voice always helped me sleep better." James felt a pang in his chest. Grace was comparing him to Sarah, trusting him in the same way she trusted her mother. He stood up and took a book from the shelf. It was a collection of classic fairy tales. He returned to the armchair and opened the book. "Which story do you want to hear?" he asked, and flipping through the pages. Anyone that has a happy ending, Grace replied. My mommy always chose the ones with happy endings. James searched through the stories and found a gentle version of Cinderella. How about this one? He showed her the illustration of a blonde girl in a blue dress. She's pretty, Grace said. She looks a little like mommy. James began to read. His voice came out low and calm, trying to imitate the tone he imagined Sarah used. Grace closed her eyes, but James could tell she was paying attention to every word. As the story progressed, James felt more comfortable. He read with more expression, changed his voice for different characters, and made dramatic pauses. Grace smiled from time to time, especially at the funny parts. When he reached the part where Cinderella goes to the ball, Grace opened her eyes. Mommy always said I was like Cinderella, she murmured. Why? Because I was good and kind, even when things were hard, and because one day I would find my happiness. James stopped reading for a moment, moved. But your mother was right. You are good and kind. And do you think I'll find my happiness? I'm sure of it, James said gently. Maybe we've already started to find it today at the park. Grace smiled and closed her eyes again. Keep reading the story. James continued reading until the happy ending. When he finished, Grace was almost asleep, but still conscious. Did you like it? He asked softly. I liked it a lot, Grace murmured. You read almost as well as Mommy. Thank you. That's a very big compliment. James? Yes. Can you read to me every night? If you want me to, yes. I do, Grace said, shifting in bed to get more comfortable. It's nice to have someone taking care of me again. James felt his eyes fill with tears. Grace was beginning to trust him, to see him as someone who cared for her, not just someone who was there out of obligation. Grace, he said softly, I like taking care of you. You're not a burden to me. You are important. Grace opened her eyes and looked at him. Then important how? James thought of the right answer. Important like a daughter would be to a father. Grace was silent for a moment, processing his words. Like Mommy was important to me. Like that. And can I think you're important like a dad? You can, James said, his voice coming out a bit hoarse. If you want to. Grace suddenly sat up in bed. For a moment, James thought he had said something wrong. But then Grace got out of bed and walked over to him. Without warning, she threw herself into his arms in a tight hug. It was the first spontaneous hug Grace had given him. All other physical contact had been initiated by James or happened by chance. But this hug was hers, of her own free will. James hugged her back, feeling how small and fragile she was in his arms. But he also felt the strength she had, the courage to trust again after everything she had lost. Thank you, Grace whispered in his ear. For what? For not leaving me alone, for reading me a story, for taking me to the park, for making me laugh. James tightened the hug. Thank you. Why? For trusting me, for letting me take care of you. They stayed in the hug for a few minutes. James felt something he hadn't felt in years, that his life had purpose. For a long time, he had been living on autopilot, working, making money, but without feeling like he truly mattered to anyone. Now, with Grace in his arms, he felt he finally had a reason to wake up in the morning, to try harder, to be a better person. Grace, he said quietly. Yes, you make me happy too. Grace pulled back a little to look at his face. Really? Really? It's been a long time since I felt truly happy. Grace smiled. Mommy always said happiness is like a light. When one person has it, it shines on other people too. Your mother was very wise. She was. And I think she'd be happy to know we found each other. Why? Because now neither of us is alone. Grace went back to bed and lay down. James settled into the armchair again. James? Yes. Can you read another story tomorrow? Of course. Which story do you want? Anyone, I just want to hear you read. Okay. Grace closed her eyes, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and held her mother's photo. James. I think I'm going to sleep well tonight. Good. I'll stay here until you fall asleep. I know, you always do. James watched Grace drift off to sleep. Her breathing became calmer, deeper, her face relaxed, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked like she was dreaming of good things. When he was sure she was sleeping deeply, James stood up slowly, but before leaving the room, he stopped and looked at Grace one more time. She had completely changed his life. In just a few days, she had transformed an empty mansion into a home, a lonely man into a father, a meaningless routine into a life with purpose. James made a silent promise. He would do everything in his power to make Grace happy, to ensure she grew up knowing she was loved, that she was important, that she had value. It was the least he could do for her. And for Sarah's memory, he left the room and closed the door slowly, feeling lighter than he had in years. Finally, his life made sense again. James was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when he heard the familiar sound of a luxury car pulling up in the driveway. He looked out the window and saw the elegant figure of his mother getting out of the vehicle, dressed all in black as always. Eleanor Whitmore never visited without notice. This could only mean trouble. The doorbell rang. James sighed and went to answer it, hoping Grace wouldn't wake up yet. "Mother," he said, opening the door. "Miss, what a surprise." "James." Eleanor entered without being invited, her high heels echoing on the marble. "We need to talk." She looked around the room with her usual critical gaze, noticing the colored pencils scattered on the table, the drawings taped to the refrigerator, the toys in the corner of the room. "I see you've made some changes to the decor," she said with disdain. "Yes, a few things have happened," James replied, trying to stay calm. "A few things." Eleanor turned to him, her cold eyes fixed on her son's face. "James, all of society is talking. You've adopted an orphan child without consulting the family." "I haven't officially adopted her yet." "I'm taking care of her temporarily." "Temporarily?" Eleanor let out a bitter laugh. "From what I hear, you've been playing daddy for a week now. This is ridiculous." James felt his anger begin to rise. "Ridiculous?" "Taking care of a child who has lost her mother is ridiculous. James, you have no idea of the consequences of your actions," Eleanor said, taking off her gloves and placing them on the table, on top of one of Grace's drawings. "Our family has a reputation, a social standing. You can't just pick up some random child off the street and—" "Grace is not some random child," James interrupted, his voice louder. "Ah, Grace. What a common name." Eleanor rolled her eyes. "James, where is your head? You're young, rich. You have your whole life ahead of you. Why tie yourself down with this burden?" "Burden?" James could hardly believe what he was hearing. "Are you calling a 5-year-old child a burden?" "Don't be dramatic. I'm being practical." Eleanor sat on the sofa as if she owned the place. "Children are work, they cost money, they limit your freedom. You're not even married. You have no experience with children. I'm learning. James, for heaven's sake, there are institutions for this, orphanages, suitable families. You don't need to sacrifice yourself." "It's not a sacrifice," James said through gritted teeth. "It's a responsibility." Eleanor sighed with impatience. "Very well. If you insist on this humanitarian phase, at least do it properly. Hire a nanny, put the child in a private school. Keep your distance. But this business of you taking care of her yourself, reading her stories, playing in the park— James, you are lowering yourself." James couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could his own mother be so cold? "Lowering myself. Taking care of Grace is the most important thing I've ever done in my life." "Grace is not your daughter," Eleanor said firmly. "She is not our blood. She is not our responsibility." At that moment, James heard a small noise from upstairs. Grace had woken up. He hoped she wouldn't come down yet. "Mother, you need to understand." "What I understand is that you're confused. You've lost focus." Eleanor stood up and began pacing the room. "James, you have duties. To the company, to the family, to your future. You can't throw it all away for some orphan child." "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm building something new." "Building?" Eleanor laughed with disdain. James, you can barely take care of yourself. How are you going to take care of a child that isn't even yours? She may not be my biological daughter, but nothing, Eleanor interrupted him. Blood is blood. Family is family. This girl does not belong in our world. James felt his anger explode inside him. And what world is that, Mother? A world where we can't help a child who's lost everything. A world where money is more important than compassion. A real world, James. A world where people know their place, Eleanor said coldly. You grew up with privilege, education, opportunities. Where does this child come from? What family? What values was she taught? Grace is a wonderful child, smart, caring, brave. That's now. But when she grows up, when she starts asking questions about her origins, when she brings problems from the life she used to have, Eleanor shook her head. James, you're being naive. James was about to reply when he heard little footsteps coming down the stairs. Grace appeared in the living room, still in her pajamas, holding her mother's photo. She stopped when she saw Eleanor, clearly intimidated by the presence of the elegant and cold woman. Good morning, Grace said quietly, half hiding behind James. Eleanor looked Grace up and down, analyzing every detail. Her eyes lingered on the girl's blonde hair for a moment, then on her face, her light eyes. So this is the famous Grace, Eleanor said, her tone icy. Grace shrank further behind James. Grace, this is my mother, James said gently, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. Hi, Grace murmured, not moving from behind him. What a shy child, Eleanor commented. James, take her to have breakfast. The adults need to talk. No, James said firmly. Grace is a part of this house. She can stay. Eleanor sighed with impatience. James, be reasonable. Send the child to her room. We have serious matters to discuss. Grace, do you want to go up to your room? James asked softly. I'll be up in a little while. Grace nodded and ran upstairs, but James noticed she stopped halfway up, listening to the conversation. He decided not to say anything. Eleanor waited until she could no longer see Grace, then continued. James, you need to think about the future. This situation cannot continue. The child needs to go to a proper family. Grace is in a proper family. Here with me. You are not her family, Eleanor said cruelly. You're a stranger who took pity on her. That's no foundation for raising a child. I am not a stranger, James countered. I take care of her. I read her stories. I take her for walks. Any nanny could do that, Eleanor dismissed. James, stop this fantasy. You are not this girl's father. She is not your daughter. She never will be. She is my daughter in every way that matters. Ways that matter, Eleanor laughed bitterly. James, you're delusional. This child has a past, a history, problems you can't even imagine. Are you going to take all of that on? I'll take on whatever is necessary. Eleanor stopped pacing and faced James directly. Very well. Since you insist on this stubbornness, I'll be clearer. She took a deep breath. James, this child cannot stay here. Our family has standards, a social position. We cannot be associated with any questionable situations. Questionable situation. Grace is an orphan, not a criminal. A child of unknown origin, without family, without structure, Eleanor listed coldly. James, do you know who her parents are? Where she comes from? What kind of life her mother led? James felt his blood boil. Her mother was a wonderful person. How do you know? Eleanor asked with disdain. Because the child said so? Because you've romanticized the situation. James took a deep breath. It was time to tell the truth. She isn't just a child, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. Grace is Sarah's daughter. Eleanor froze completely. The color drained from her face. What did you say? Grace is the daughter of Sarah Mitchell. The Sarah you know very well. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor stood motionless, like a statue, processing the information. Sarah, she repeated, her voice almost a whisper. That's right, Sarah. My first love. The girl you... That I what? Eleanor asked. But James could see she knew exactly what he was talking about. The girl you destroyed. The girl you humiliated. The girl you pushed away from me. Eleanor quickly composed herself, returning to her usual cold demeanor. James, I didn't destroy anyone. I protected you. Protected me. James couldn't believe it. Mother, I loved Sarah, and she loved me. You destroyed our relationship. I saved you from a mistake that would have ruined your life, Eleanor said without a hint of remorse. Sarah was not suitable for our family. Not suitable. She was smart, caring, honest. She was poor, Eleanor cut in. A scholarship student. No family, no position, no future. She wasn't worthy of our family. James felt like he had been punched in the stomach. Not worthy, Mother? Did you hear what you just said? I heard perfectly, and I don't regret it, Eleanor said with absolute coldness. James, you were young, impressionable. Sarah took advantage of that. Sarah didn't take advantage of anything. We loved each other. Love, Eleanor scoffed. James, you were 17. It was attraction, hormones, not true love. How can you know? How can you judge what I felt? Eleanor was silent for a moment, as if deciding how much of the truth to tell. James, she finally said, I got rid of her. What do you mean, you got rid of her? I spoke with Sarah. I made her situation clear. I offered her money to disappear from your life, Eleanor said without any emotion, and she accepted. James felt the world spin. His legs felt like they couldn't support him. You... What? I offered Sarah money to get out of your life, and she took the money and vanished, Eleanor repeated cruelly. And that shows you the kind of person she really was. No, that's not possible, James stammered. It's perfectly possible. And it happened, Eleanor said. Sarah wasn't the saint you imagine. She was an opportunist who saw a chance to make easy money. James sat down heavily on the sofa, trying to process what he was hearing. How much? How much did you give her? Enough for her to start a new life away from you, Eleanor said. And apparently it wasn't enough, since she ended up dying young and leaving an orphan daughter. The cruelty of Eleanor's words was like a knife to James's heart. How can you talk like that? Sarah is dead. Grace has lost her mother. And that's a tragedy for them, not for us, Eleanor said coldly. James, you are not responsible for the choices Sarah made after she left your life. But I am responsible for Grace now. No, you are not, Eleanor approached him. James, that child is not your daughter. You owe her nothing. I owe her everything. James stood up, his anger returning with full force. Because of you, Sarah faced a pregnancy alone. Because of you, Grace grew up without a father. Because of you, they suffered. Because of me, you didn't ruin your life at 17, Eleanor retorted. James, I did what any mother would do to protect her son. You destroyed 3 people's lives, James shouted. Mine, Sarah's, and Grace's. Don't be so dramatic. Dramatic? James was beside himself. Mother, you took Sarah out of my life. She had to raise our daughter alone. She died young, probably because she had no support, no structure. And Grace was orphaned, because you couldn't accept that I loved someone who didn't meet your social standards. Our daughter? Eleanor asked, her eyes wide. James stopped. He had said it without thinking, but now the words were out there. Grace is my daughter, he said, calmer now. I'm sure of it. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, analyzing the information. Even if it were true, she said finally, even if this child were your biological daughter, it changes nothing. It changes nothing. James couldn't believe it. You don't know her. You didn't participate in her upbringing. You don't know what kind of values she was taught. Sarah could have filled her head with wrong ideas about our family, Eleanor said coldly. This child could be a problem in the future. James looked at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. Her coldness, her cruelty, her complete lack of compassion. How had he never noticed this before? Get out of my house, he said quietly. James, get out of my house, he yelled. Now, Eleanor picked up her gloves from the table, adjusted her purse and walked towards the door. James, you will regret this decision, she said. When this fantasy is over, when reality hits, you will realize I was right. The only thing I regret is taking so long to see who you really are. Eleanor stopped at the door and turned one last time. James, this child will bring trouble, and when she does, don't come crying to me. I will never cry to you again, James said firmly. I will never even speak to you again. Eleanor left and slammed the door. James stood in the living room, shaking with anger and shock. It was then that he heard quiet sobs coming from the stairs. Grace had heard everything. James stood in the living room, still shaking with anger after his mother left. The echo of her cruel words still reverberated in his head. I got rid of her. Sarah was poor, a scholarship student. She wasn't worthy of our family. How had he never realized his own mother's coldness? The quiet sobs from the stairs brought him back to reality. Grace had heard everything. All that horrible conversation, all those cruel words about her mother. James looked up and saw Grace sitting in the middle of the staircase, hugging Sarah's photo, crying silently. Her little blue eyes were red and full of tears. She looked even smaller there, huddled against the steps. Grace, he called softly. She didn't answer, just curled up more. James went up the stairs slowly, trying not to frighten her. He sat on the step beside her, keeping a respectful distance. Sweetie, did you hear the conversation? Grace nodded without looking at him, wiping her nose on the back of her hand. I didn't mean to listen, she murmured, but the lady was talking very loud. And she was talking about me. James felt his heart break. How could he explain to a 5-year-old child what had just happened downstairs? Grace, I am so sorry you had to hear that. The lady doesn't like me, Grace said quietly. She said I'm a burden, that I can't stay here. Grace, look at me, James said gently. She lifted her little eyes, still full of tears. So that lady is my mother, but that doesn't mean she's right, James explained. Sometimes us grown-ups say mean things when they're angry. But she said I'm not your real daughter, that I'm not part of your family. James swallowed hard. How could he explain this without lying? Grace, family isn't just about blood. Family is about love, about taking care of each other, about being together. But, Grace hesitated, fiddling with the photo frame. She said you're not responsible for me, that I have to go somewhere else. She was wrong, James said firmly. Completely wrong. Grace was silent for a moment, processing his words. Then, in an even quieter voice, she asked the question that broke James's heart. Do I have to leave too? Tears returned to her eyes, and James felt as if someone had squeezed his heart tightly. Too? He asked. Like Mommy left, Grace explained, her voice trembling. Everyone leaves. First Mommy. Now I have to leave you. James couldn't hold back his own tears. Grace's insecurity, her fear of being abandoned again, cut his soul in half. Grace, he said, reaching his hand out to her, can I hold your hand? Grace hesitated, then placed her small hand in his. Grace, look into my eyes, James said, holding her hand carefully. You are not going to have to leave ever. Promise? I promise. With all my heart. James squeezed her hand lightly. Grace, you are important to me. Very important. No matter what anyone says, you are going to stay here with me. Even if other people don't like me. Even if the whole world doesn't like you. I do. And that's what matters. Grace studied his face, trying to decide if she could trust these words. Guy, but what if you get tired of me? What if I'm too much trouble? Grace, you will never be too much trouble. You will never be a burden. You are... James searched for the right words. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. Really, really. Before you came, my life was empty. This house was just a big, cold house. Now it's a home. Because of you. Grace smiled a little through her tears. Mommy always said that home is where the love is. Your mother was right. And there is a lot of love here. Love for you. Grace moved a little closer to him on the stairs. James? Yes. Do you think Mommy would be mad if I called you Daddy sometimes? The question caught James completely off guard. He felt his eyes well up with tears again. I think your mum would be very happy, he said, his voice hoarse. very happy indeed. So I can. If you want to, you can. Grace threw herself into his arms in a tight hug. James hugged her back, feeling how perfectly she fit against his chest. Thank you for not sending me away, she whispered. Thank you for letting me be your daddy, he whispered back. They hugged for a few minutes, until Grace stopped crying completely. When she pulled away, she was smiling. James, I mean, Daddy? Yes. Can I still call you James too? Or does it have to be Daddy all the time? James laughed. You can call me whatever you want. James, Daddy, or anything else you make up. Okay. James stood up and held out his hand to her. How about we go down and have a real breakfast? I think after all this commotion, we both deserve some pancakes. Grace took his hand, and they went down together. In the kitchen, James made pancakes while Grace sat at the table, watching him cook. The mood was lighter now, but James could still see that she was a little shaken. Grace, he said, flipping a pancake in the pan, how about we do something special today, to celebrate that we're a family? What kind of special thing? I don't know. What would you like to do? Grace thought for a moment. Can I choose anything? Anything within my power. Let's buy a cake just the way you like it. What's your favorite? James proposed, serving the pancakes on her plate. Grace smiled. Chocolate, but I can't eat strawberries because I'm allergic. James paused with the spatula in the air. Come again. I'm allergic to strawberries, Grace repeated. If I eat them, I get all red and itchy. Mommy was always careful. You're allergic to strawberries too? James asked, surprised. I have the same allergy. Grace's eyes widened. Really? Really? Since I was a little boy. If I eat strawberries, I get all red and swollen. Wow, Grace said, impressed. So what a weird coincidence. James stood still, processing the information. A strawberry allergy wasn't very common, and for Grace to have the exact same allergy as him. James, Grace called. Are you okay? I am, he composed himself. It's a really big coincidence. As they ate, James watched Grace more closely. He had always noticed she looked like Sarah, but now he started to notice other things. The way she held her fork. He did the exact same thing when he was a child. The way she tilted her head when she was concentrating, just like him. The tiny dimples that appeared when she smiled, just like his. And now the strawberry allergy. James shook his head. Coincidences. They had to be coincidences. Daddy, Grace said suddenly. Yes, he replied, still getting used to the name. Why did you get sad when I mentioned the allergy? I wasn't sad. I was surprised. Surprised how? It's just, I've never met anyone who had the same allergy as me. I thought it was interesting. Grace nodded, satisfied with the explanation. Their mummy always said that people who are alike find each other, she said. Like us. You knew Mummy, and now you take care of me, and we have the same allergy. Your mother was wise. She knew a lot of things. Grace ate another piece of pancake. Daddy, yes? Do you think I look like you? The question caught James off guard. Why do you ask that? I don't know. Sometimes I look at myself in the mirror and I think I look a little like you. In the eyes. James looked into Grace's blue eyes. They were indeed similar to his, but they were also similar to Sarah's. You have beautiful eyes, he said diplomatically. So I just like your mother's. But do you think they look like yours too? James studied her face. Yes, there were similarities, but he didn't want to raise hopes that might be false. A little, he admitted. But you're much prettier than me. Grace giggled. Men aren't pretty, men are handsome. James laughed too. Who taught you that? Mommy. She always said I would find a handsome boyfriend when I grew up. And you will, but in a long, long time. Grace made a face. Boyfriends are gross. I'd rather stay with you. James felt his heart warm. I'd rather stay with you too. They finished breakfast talking about light things. James told her about his own childhood, about the mischief he used to get into. Grace laughed a lot when he told her about the time he tried to fly by tying bedsheets to his arms. You were pretty silly, she said, laughing. I was, and I still am sometimes. No, you're not silly, You're the best daddy in the world." James felt his eyes fill with tears again. "And you're the best daughter in the world." Grace smiled and threw herself into his arms once more. As he held her, James thought about all the coincidences, the strawberry allergy, the physical resemblances, the similar gestures. It could just be a coincidence, or it could be something more, but even if it was just a coincidence, it didn't matter. Grace was his daughter now, in all the ways that truly mattered. "So," he said, pulling Grace back to look at her face, "how about we go buy that chocolate cake? Can I pick the decorations?" "You can pick everything. Even the color of the candle. Even the color of the candle." Grace clapped her hands, excited. "Psych, I'm going to get ready," she said, running to the stairs. "I'm going to look really pretty to celebrate our new family." James was left alone in the kitchen, smiling. Our new family. He liked the sound of that. As he washed the dishes, he thought about the conversation with his mother, about her cruelty, her coldness, her complete lack of love. But then he thought of Grace calling him daddy, of her hug, of the absolute trust she placed in him. His mother was wrong, completely wrong. Grace wasn't a burden. Grace was a gift, and he would do everything in his power to deserve that gift, even if it meant never speaking to his own mother again, even if it meant completely changing his life. Grace was worth all of it. And so much more. "Daddy," Grace yelled from upstairs, "can you help me pick an outfit?" "I'm coming," he yelled back, and he ran up the stairs, his heart full of love and determination. Grace was his daughter, in every way that mattered, and he would never again let anyone make her feel like she didn't belong. In the days following the discovery of their shared allergy, James couldn't shake the suspicion from his mind. He watched Grace with growing attention, noting every gesture, every expression, every mannerism that might confirm his suspicions. The way she wrinkled her nose when she didn't like something, exactly like him when he was a child. The way she drummed her fingers on the table when she was thinking, a habit he'd had since he was little and never managed to break. The small scar on her chin that she had, he also had one, the same size, in the same place, from when he fell off his bike at age 6. The shape of her fingernails, the curve of her eyebrows, even the way she held her colored pencil. Small details that together formed a pattern impossible to ignore. All these similarities were too much to be mere chance. There was something deeper there, something that went beyond Grace simply being Sarah's daughter. After a week of silent observation and much internal debate, James made a decision that would change everything. He needed to know the truth. Not just for himself, but for Grace too. She deserved to know who her real father was. One Tuesday morning, while Grace was drawing in the living room as she always did after breakfast, James said he needed to go out to handle some important work matters. "Will you be long?" Grace asked, without looking up from the paper where she was drawing a house with flowers. "A few hours, but I'll be back for lunch." "Okay. I'll make a really pretty drawing for you to see when you get back." James kissed the top of her head and drove to a private lab in the city center. He had researched carefully, choosing a discreet place that wouldn't ask unnecessary questions. "I'd like to have a paternity test," he told the receptionist, trying to keep his voice calm despite his racing heart. "Of course, sir. Do you need to bring the child in today? Would it be possible to do it with just a sample from me first, and then, if necessary, bring the child in?" The woman patiently explained the whole procedure. James provided a saliva sample and a few strands of Grace's hair that he had discreetly collected from her brush earlier that morning. "The results will be ready in 3 business days," she informed him, handing him a receipt. "Do you prefer to pick them up in person?" "I'll pick them up in person," James replied without hesitation. Those were the 3 longest days of James's life. He tried to act normally with Grace, maintaining their usual routine, breakfast together, story time, walks in the park. But he couldn't stop thinking about what the results would reveal. Grace, with the sharp perception that children have, noticed he was different. "Daddy, are you worried about something?" she asked during dinner on the second day, putting down her fork to study his face. "Why do you think that, sweetie? You're kind of quiet, and you're looking at me in a different way. Like when you want to say something but don't know how." James was impressed by her intelligence. Grace was truly very observant for a 5-year-old. "Sorry if I worried you. I just have some work things on my mind." Boring grown-up stuff? A little. Grace got up from her chair and went to him, stroking his arm with her small hand. Mommy always said that when we're worried. A hug from the person we love helps solve any problem. James pulled her into a tight hug. If the results confirmed what he suspected, Grace was really his daughter, and Sarah had raised this wonderful child all alone. "Thank you, sweetie. The hug really helped," he said, kissing the top of her head. "It always helps. Love always helps," Grace said with the simple wisdom of children. On the morning of the third day, James could barely concentrate on anything. He kept looking at the clock every 5 minutes, waiting for the time to pick up the results. At 10 o'clock sharp, his phone rang. "Mr. Whitmore, this is the lab. Your test results are ready. Would you like to come pick them up?" "I'll be there right away," James said, his voice coming out a bit hoarse. He left Grace with the babysitter and drove to the lab. His hands were shaking so much he could barely start the car. He received the sealed envelope with trembling hands. He left the lab and went to his car, but he couldn't drive yet. He had to read it first. He sat in the driver's seat and took a deep breath before opening the envelope. His hands were shaking so much he almost tore the paper. He read the result once. Then he read it again, to be absolutely sure he wasn't dreaming. Result: 99.9% probability of paternity confirmed. Grace was his daughter. James leaned his head against the steering wheel and cried like he hadn't cried in years. He cried with relief, with joy, with sadness that Sarah had faced it all alone. He cried with anger that his mother had destroyed their lives. But mostly, he cried with pure happiness. Grace was really his daughter, his little girl, his family. He drove home in a state of shock, still trying to process what he had just discovered. How would he tell Grace? How would he explain that he was her biological father? When he got home, Grace was in the living room drawing, as always. She looked up at him and smiled in that way that always melted his heart. "Hi, Daddy. How was your boring meeting?" "Grace," he said, sitting next to her on the sofa, "I need to talk to you about something very important." Grace immediately dropped her colored pencil and turned to him, paying full attention. "Is it something bad?" she asked, with that genuine concern she always showed. "It's not bad, sweetie, but it's very important. Maybe the most important thing I've ever said in my life." Grace nodded solemnly, waiting. James took a deep breath, trying to find the right words to start a conversation that would change everything between them. "Grace, do you remember when I said I knew your mother a long time ago? I remember. You said she was special to you." "She was very special. In fact," James paused, feeling his heart race. "Your mother and I loved each other very much. She was the most beautiful girl in school." Grace smiled, her eyes shining. Mommy was really beautiful. Everyone said so. She was the most beautiful of all, and she loved me too. We were dating when we were teenagers. "You were dating?" Grace asked, curious. "Like in the romantic movies Mommy liked." "Exactly like in the movies. We were very happy together. We made plans for the future. We dreamed of being together forever." "So what happened?" Grace asked, tilting her head with that familiar gesture. James sighed deeply. "Wrong choices separated us. My family, especially my mother, that lady who came here the other day, didn't approve of our relationship." Grace scowled at the memory of Eleanor. "She didn't like Mommy. She didn't. And she did very bad things to separate us. She offered your mother money to go away and never come back." Grace's eyes widened. "That's so mean." "It was very mean. And your mother, who was young and scared, ended up accepting and leaving." Grace looked thoughtful for a moment. "So is that why Mommy got sad when I asked about my dad?" "Exactly. She was sad because she loved me, but she thought she couldn't tell me about you. She was afraid my family would be cruel to you both." "How very sad," Grace said sincerely. "It was the greatest sadness of my life," James agreed. "Yeah, but Grace, there's one more very important thing I need to tell you." "What?" James took her small hands in his. "Your allergy caught my attention, and other things too. I did a test and it confirmed. I am your father." Grace was completely still for several seconds, processing the information she had just received. "You're my real dad?" she asked in a whisper. "I am biologically, genetically, in every possible way. You are my daughter, my little girl." Grace stared at him, serious but emotional. "Now I have a dad," she said, her voice trembling with pure happiness. James felt the tears stream freely down his face. "And I have a daughter. The most wonderful, most special, most perfect daughter in the world." Grace threw herself into his arms in a desperate hug. James held her with all the strength he had. "And I will never leave you," he whispered in her ear. "Promise? Really promise?" "I promise with my whole life. You are now officially my daughter. And I'm officially your father. Forever and ever. Forever and ever." They stayed in the hug for a long time, crying together, laughing together, finally complete as a real family. When they pulled apart, Grace wiped the tears from her own face and then from James's. "Can I tell everyone that you're my real dad? You can tell whoever you want. I'm going to shout from the rooftops that you're my daughter. And can I call you Dad always, always, always? And I'll call you my daughter always too." Grace smiled, radiant with happiness. "Daddy?" "Yes, my daughter. Are we going to live together forever for real now?" "Forever for real. This house is our house." "Your real home?" Grace looked around the living room, as if seeing it with completely new eyes. "Our house, our real family, our real family." In the days and weeks that followed, James took care of all the legal aspects. He officially registered Grace as his daughter, changed all the documents, and ensured she had all the rights she deserved. The mansion truly transformed completely. Where there was once oppressive silence, there were now cheerful laughs. Where there was once emptiness and coldness, there was now life and warmth. Grace filled every corner of the house with her luminous presence. James hired private tutors for Grace, but also enrolled her in a nearby school where she could make friends. He bought more toys, more books, more colored pencils. The house that once felt like a cold museum now truly felt like a home filled with love. A week after the revelation, on a sunny afternoon, Grace was in the living room drawing as she always did. James came in and sat beside her, watching her work. "And what are you drawing today, my daughter?" "It's a surprise," Grace said, covering the paper with her small hands. "I'm almost finished. It's going to be the prettiest drawing I've ever made." James waited patiently, smiling at her concentration. "Done," Grace announced after a few minutes, showing him the drawing with pride. It was a tall figure and a small figure, holding hands, both smiling broadly. The two figures were surrounded by colorful flowers and a bright sun. Above the drawing, in large, colorful, and neat letters, was written, "Family." James felt his eyes fill with tears once again. "It's beautiful, Grace. It's the most beautiful drawing I've ever seen. Is it us?" "It is. You and me, our real family," she replied, beaming. James took the drawing carefully and observed every detail. Grace had drawn them both with so much love. "Grace, this is the most precious treasure I have ever received in my life. It's for you to keep forever. So you never forget that we're a real family now." "I will never forget," James promised, holding the drawing against his heart. "And I will never forget how lucky I am to be your father." "And I'm lucky to be your daughter." James pulled her into another tight hug. "Now we're a real family, Grace. Forever. Forever and ever," she repeated, happy. James looked around the living room. Grace's drawings were taped to the refrigerator, framed on the walls, scattered across every table. Her colorful toys occupied every corner. Her books were stacked neatly. The house was wonderfully messy, joyfully noisy, completely full of life and love. It was absolutely perfect. "Grace," he said softly. "Yes, Daddy. Thank you." "For what?" "For existing. For being my daughter. For making my life feel complete." Grace smiled and gave him an affectionate little kiss on the cheek. "Thank you for finding me and for loving me." "I was always going to find you," James said with conviction. "One way or another, fate was always going to bring us together." Grace went back to drawing, now working on something new. James watched her, Still holding the family drawing against his chest, he thought of Sarah, of how happy she would be to know they had finally found each other, of how proud she would be of the incredible daughter she had raised. He thought of his mother, of all her cruelty, of how she had lost the chance to know the extraordinary granddaughter she had, but mostly, he thought of the bright future that awaited them, of all the mornings he would wake up with Grace running into his room, of all the stories he would read to her at night, of all the beautiful drawings she would make. "Daddy," Grace said without looking up from her new paper. "Yes, my daughter. Are you happy now?" "I'm the happiest person who has ever existed in the entire world." "I'm the happiest too." James smiled and went back to watching Grace draw, his heart overflowing with pure love. Yes, now they were a real family forever. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.